I've been obsessed with science fiction since I was a child, and I was fortunate to have a dad who fostered my love of the genre, and he thought it was completely appropriate to give me Ursula K. Le Guin's classic sci-fi novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, to read when I was 12. The Left Hand of Darkness was published in 1969, and it's a feminist examination of gender and sexuality told through a sci-fi lens. For the time, it was very revolutionary. In The Left Hand of Darkness, Le Guin imagines a planet called Guin, on which the people, who are distant cousins of the humans from Earth, they're all the same gender, double-sexed with both male and female reproductive organs. Gathenians are asexual and gender-neutral most of the time, but for a few days every month, they enter Kemmer, their sexual phase, and become either dominantly male or dominantly female. During this time, they can mate. They have no gender preference. An individual who becomes male this month may become female next month, and an individual can both sire and bear children. So you can see why in 1969 this was pretty revolutionary stuff. So in the book, Le Guin places an emissary from Earth, a human man named Genli I, onto Guin as the first envoy from the rest of the federated planets in the universe. He's considered a freak on Guin. They call him a pervert because he's always both gendered and sexually potent. Le Guin uses this fictional situation to explore how societies define and confine love and relationships, and how those who deviate in some way from the norm negotiate this territory. I'm going to read a short excerpt from her novel, in which the narrator, Genli I, finally comes to terms with his own prejudices and biases as a male from a gender-divided society through the deep friendship he develops with the Gathenian Estraven. Genli has referred to Estraven as he throughout the book, conceptualizing the genderless individual as male as the default, until they are trapped in a tent during an ice storm during a perilous journey. So this is from The Left Hand of Darkness. I expect it will turn out that sexual intercourse is possible between Gathenian double-sexed and one-sexed human beings, though such intercourse will inevitably be sterile. It remains to be proved. Estraven and I proved nothing except perhaps a rather subtler point. The nearest to crisis that our sexual desires brought us was on a night early in the journey, our second night up on the ice. After dinner, Estraven grew taciturn and cut my talk off short. I said at last, after a direct rebuff, "I've said something wrong again. Please tell me what it is." We were both silent for a while, and then he looked at me with a direct, gentle gaze. His face in the reddish light was as soft, as vulnerable, as remote as the face of a woman who looks at you out of her thoughts and does not speak. And I saw then again, and for good, what I had always been afraid to see and had pretended not to see in him, that he was a woman as well as a man. Any need to explain the sources of that fear vanished with the fear. What I was left with was, at last, acceptance of him as he was. Until then, I had rejected him, refused him his own reality. He was the only one on Guin who had entirely accepted me as a human being, who had liked me personally and given me entire personal loyalty, and who therefore had demanded me an equal degree of recognition, of acceptance. I had not been willing to give it. I had been afraid to give it. I had not wanted to give my trust, my friendship, to a man who was a woman who was a man. He explained stiffly and simply that he was in Kemmer and had been trying to avoid me insofar as one of us could avoid the other. "I must not touch you," he said, with extreme constraint, saying that he looked away. I said, "I understand. I agree completely." For it seemed to me, and I think to him, that it was from the sexual tension between us, admitted now and understood, but not assuaged, that the great and sudden assurance of friendship between us rose, a friendship so much needed by us both in our exile, and already so well proved in the days and nights of our bitter journey, that that it might as well be called, now as later, love. But it was from the difference between us, not the affinities and likenesses, but from the difference that love came, and it was itself the bridge, the only bridge across what divided us. So, I can only speculate that my early exposure to the left hand of darkness and subsequent tons of reading of this type of work helped spark my own interest in using science fiction premises to examine our changing notions of gender, sexuality, love, and the institutions we build around those concepts. Living in San Francisco in 2015, where concepts of gender, sexuality, love, and partnership are being explored, exploded, turned inside down and upside down and inside out, this type of writing feels quite timely. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a story that I wrote recently. This was actually published in December by the online journal The Red Line. The story is called From Dark Ridge. Anxiety has been with me ever since Rule and I started mingling tendrils 2 moon cycles back. At moments, it cuts through even the acute pleasure that racks my body whenever we join, all our tendrils tangled, locked together and unable to pull apart until our bodies have exchanged their mating fluids. Which is the point of it all, the young that will result from our mating and carry our species on into the future, filling the valley that has been home to the Arut people for as long as anyone recalls. I want only to remain entwined with Rule forever, but soon we will make the choice, and we will never again be united as synchronous beings with identical bodies. After the choice, when one of us becomes root and one becomes air, I will no longer know exactly what it feels like for Rule when we mingle. Since we are still pre-choice, looking at Rule, like looking at any other immature Arut, is like looking at my own image on the surface of water. Smooth brown skin tinged with deep green, 2 big dark eyes, a small toothless mouth set in the middle of a round face, crowned with sinuous top tendrils that, when at rest, fall to the middle of an abdomen designed to stretch and contract when the lung sacs inside inflate for flight. 4 short arms with stubby fingers, used mainly to carry things and to show affection. Long root tendrils extending from the bottom of the abdomen and trailing on the ground. Once we make the choice, our bodies will grow distinct from each other. If I become root, my bottom tendrils will sink into the ground, anchoring me to one spot for the rest of my life, growing and extending into the earth, allowing my consciousness to spread through the soil across vast distances. My top tendrils will shrink to 1/3 of their present length. If I become air, my root tendrils will shrink and become less dexterous, making it impossible for me to sink them into the ground the way I can now. My top tendrils will grow longer and slimmer, my body lighter, and I will be able to fly higher and farther than I can as an immature Arut. Once we make the choice, Rule and I will both look and feel completely different than we do now. Legend says that when the fur people first visited Arut Valley in the time of the ancestors, they believed us to be 2 separate species until they learned about our biology. The fur people, whose name for us in their language is people of the earth and sky, do not have such a divergence in their species. I have come to envy them for it. It's only been 2 moon cycles since the urgency came upon us, but it's difficult to remember that it hasn't always been like this between Rule and me. Looking back, I suppose it was inevitable that we should pair. Rule and I have always been close, though when we are young and don't understand what the urgency feels like yet, it is easy to say, oh, it may be Rule or Pav or Cam, inseparable, the 4 of us, and I'm probably the easiest to get along with. But the instant it began, I looked at Rule and I knew. We've spent 20 sun cycles as friends and playmates, but in the short time since the urgency began, Rule has become vital to me in a way I couldn't conceive of before. It came on without warning on an innocent afternoon. Rule was hovering at the edge of my glade, dark eyes flashing with impatience and daring. Always the most difficult of the four of us, Rule was, asking too many questions of the type the grown ones don't like to answer, challenging our little group to try stunts when we flew up around the heights that would have had us grounded for days had we been found out. That afternoon, Rule was waiting for me to finish plucking a bush clean of bayberries and shoving them into my mouth. I relished their sweet purple juice bursting over my tongue. Lately, I could not get enough of bayberries. "Come on, Sen, you glutton," Rule teased. "You'll never be able to keep up with me with a belly full of berry juice." "We'll see about that," I replied, and abruptly inflated my lung sacs, beginning to rise as my body warmed the air I took in. Soon I was gaining altitude and velocity as my lung sacs settled into their warming cycle. My root tendrils whipped out behind me to propel me upward, and my top tendrils flowed back over my head, shifting to guide my direction. I whizzed upward, clearing the tops of the banban trees and flitting past slower-moving mature airs whose root tendrils were thin and short, no longer as effective at providing momentum. The grown airs don't mind, of course. Everyone slows down after the choice, which certainly doesn't make it any more appealing to me. Rule raced close behind me. I knew only the pleasure of the wind streaking along my body, my abdomen filled with sweet, warm air, and my friend gaining on me until we flew side by side to the top of Dark Ridge and swirled to a stop, panting and laughing. We expelled the air from our lung sacs and drifted to ground in one of the small rooshute groves that dot the top of the ridge. Usually, upon landing, we both would have sunk our root tendrils into the soft, welcoming dark earth for which the ridge is named, and sighed with satisfaction as we met the moist earth and entwined with it, feeling what the dark earth knows, expanding out from the rooted point where you stand swaying, stretching beyond your own physical reach or consciousness, to experience a deep entwining with all the rooted members of our people, personalities and elements far beyond the boundaries of one body. Our people live entwined with the land, tending it, caring for it. Our legends say our ancestors became Erud to heal our valley of an ancient sickness, and in gratitude, our valley cares for us. The fur people, who walk on 4 arms and do not fly or root, but carry their homes on their backs as they roam the earth, say that our valley is the only place in the entire world where they have encountered the Erud. Indeed, our biology is so tied into the ecology of our homeland that it is impossible to imagine us existing elsewhere. What we experience during rooting as pre-choice young is a pale shadow of what the grown roots do, but still exquisite and so integral to my being in the world that I can no less imagine never rooting again than I can imagine never flying again. Yet sometime within the next few moon cycles, when our mating fluids have been mixed by the mingling until they are identical, our body chemistries altered permanently, rendering us fertile, Rule and I will have to choose. I will have to give up either the sky or the ground, a full half of the world I have known thus far. How can I be asked to make such a choice, to never again fly up to Dark Ridge, or to be able to visit Dark Ridge, but not root in its rich earth? That day, something different happened when Rule and I drifted to ground in the clearing on top of Dark Ridge. Our eyes met as our abdomens deflated, and inexplicably my breath caught. Rule's eyes were darker than usual, dark with something I had never seen before, yet somehow recognized as desire. Without willing it, all my tendrils strained towards Rule, who was being similarly pulled to me by some unfamiliar force. When the first of our tendrils met, as they had innocuously 1,000,000 times before in games or small displays of affection, the effect was lightning and thunder and the most delicious taste I had ever tasted, and the feel of river water sliding across my skin. We probably both realized it was the urgency that was upon us, but such abstract things as words had no meaning during that first frenzied mingling. We were roots to roots and tops to tops, clutching at each other with our arms to keep our tendrils as close as possible, to allow them to slide over and around and along each other. We shuddered, our bodies trembled. We didn't let go until we were spent, until our tendrils became so inflamed and sensitive that we could no longer bear the mingling and fell apart from each other, rolling onto our backs and gazing up into the spindly root-shoot branches. After a little while, Rule took two of my hands, and I turned my head so that we were looking into each other's eyes. What I saw took my breath away. Rule was happy, content, calm. Rule, for once, was not in motion, not eager to move, not impatient with me or the world, not clamoring to leave. This person who had been my friend for so long was suddenly both a deeper mystery than I had ever known, someone I could spend the rest of my life exploring, and would, and also the most familiar thing in the entire world. In that moment, we were identical, but we would not always be so, and the second component of the anxiety came to me then. Not only was I loath to choose to be root or air, I was loath to choose to be different than Rule, to be Rule's opposite or complement, to be unequivocally other than Rule. How would we still feel this close when our bodies became so different? Would I still feel, when I looked into Rule's eyes, that I was looking into the one person who understood me? Thank you.